Hey everyone.
Hi.
This is Alicia Miller. I'm the founder of Core Emotional Healing.
And I'm Dr. Doug Miller. I'm a licensed psychologist, a clinical and transpersonal psychologist. Transpersonal psychology is the relationship between sort of ordinary psychology and the spiritual. And that's been a focus of mine. Today, we're going to talk about one of our passions, which is experiential therapy and how it can help you get unstuck.
Yes, and before we go into all of that, a little bit about Core Emotional Healing. I developed the model, and it's a set of processes that more fully address the emotional root cause of chronic physical, emotional symptoms, in addition to eating disorders, addictions, including codependency, and also relationship problems. And once you address the core emotional root cause, all of those symptoms and conditions shift.
Yeah, Alicia's model developed out of her own very persistent and dedicated healing journey. And for example, she was in a successful corporate career and sold everything, gave up her job, and moved to Thailand for 2.5 years, where she did a lot of healing. And she did a bunch of other work when she came back to the States. And she realized that it was the core emotional issues that were the source of not only psychological and relationship stuff, but also some physical symptoms. Mm-hmm. We're married, and
Doug was the end result, is what I say, of all of the healing work that I did. And once I got to the core and the root of my physical symptoms, that pattern shifted, the relationship pattern shifted for me, and then I met Doug 3 months later.
And I helped her further develop the model and formalize it a little bit. And, I do wonder, I might be the end result, but we don't really know.
Well, core
what
emotional
other
healing
things could result. Like this video
in
is
our
another
experiential therapy.
Experiential therapy has brought us together.
So we have all these babies.
Yeah.
As a result.
I like that.
Our babies, yeah. So, today we're going to be talking first about how to recognize when you're stuck in a pattern. And so I, from my own healing journey, was stuck in many, many patterns. And so you can recognize when you're stuck in a pattern if you are saying things like this. I'm always treated poorly in my relationships.
yeah, that's a big one. And what that's showing is that there's something going on inside you where you may be picking those relationships and have beliefs and based on your childhood experiences and other things that cause you to get into those relationships and maintain that pattern.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
We are.
Today as well. Mm-hmm. So other signs that you're stuck in a pattern, you may be saying, why does this always happen to me? Or this keeps happening to me.
Yeah, I kind of like that one because in particular that one sometimes becomes almost like a spiritual issue. Like you might feel you were born under a dark cloud or a bad sign. Or that, like, even that God has it in for you. I mean, people do say things like that and feel that way.
Yeah.
But we know that these things go back, most often to core emotional issues, sometimes transgenerational, but that's for another video.
Another thing you may catch yourself saying or thinking even is that you're not supported or you're not getting what you need. You're not getting your needs met. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And another one is that you may say, I can't get the love that I really want, or it's not possible to get what I want.
Yeah, one of the things about like all of these, it's like some of these statements, it's like there can be an implication that it's happening from the outside and you're not getting something you deserve, or the world's not giving it to you, or God isn't. The universe isn't giving it to you. And what the work does in part is to help you realize what you're doing. And in that sense, it empowers you to take control of these things and start getting the things that you do want.
Yeah, and so that's a simple mindset shift from victimhood of thinking that this always happens to you and it's out of your control, to being more empowered and looking at the pattern. So recognizing when you're in a pattern, not that you are doing something that you know is wrong, like you're not actually doing something wrong that you're aware of, that, so there is something to look at that you're not consciously aware of.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And another one is maybe I can't stop emotionally eating. That was one of mine, and actually I think I've had all of these actually at one point in my life, but one of them was that I didn't eat like other people ate. I just thought that that trait of emotionally eating was a part of me or who I was. And then after doing the core emotional healing work, that shifted and all emotional eating went away without any effort or trying or thinking about it.
So. Yeah, I think I like carbohydrates when I'm real stressed out at night. That's about the only way I know that I've emotionally eaten. But that's one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that what I'm talking about is it's a way that people deal with stress is emotionally eat, and they can't stop.
But they could have grief, or they could have sadness, or anger, and be literally almost literally be stuffing their emotions, keeping the food going in so the emotion can't be expressed or felt.
And just knowing that emotionally eating is that you're eating your emotions, that it's not who you are, but it's how you're coping. So another one is everyone always stresses me out, or nobody likes me. So just kind of blanket statements about how people are treating you or what they think about you.
Yeah, and I think, when these things are pervasive or occur across your relationships, or you've generalized to the universe or God, then it is reflecting something inside of you that can be addressed in this work that we'll be talking about. Yeah.
And lastly, there's many, many examples of how to catch yourself if you're stuck in a pattern. But just another example that we're giving today is no matter what I do, it's never enough. And so you may find yourself working hard all the time and feeling like you're never doing enough.
Yeah, and that often comes from a feeling of maybe not having been loved enough, or being appreciated for who you actually are, and always maybe feeling that you have to prove yourself or be more than you are. And it's because it goes back to something else, not actually what's happening in the moment. It's sort of bottomless, and it goes on and on.
Yeah, or how you were loved. You were only loved if you were
a specific way.
Yeah,
which is not for who you were.
Right, or what you wanted to do, or how you felt.
And we could keep just going on and on with this one.
And we will, eventually.
But not now. So, these things that we're talking about, actually, Sigmund Freud, the grandfather of modern psychology and the founder of psychoanalysis, talked about the repetition compulsion. And what that is, it's a little more intricate kind of pattern of what we're talking about. But what it is if you didn't receive something that you needed in childhood, or if there was some kind of abuse going on, that you may actually be drawn to people who were like the caregiver that treated you in that poor way. And what Freud talked about is that what you're actually trying to do is like you're trying to fix the situation in the past in a current relationship. So let's say you had an alcoholic father and who wasn't available, and you may be attracted to alcoholic men or women, and in your effort to try to fix dad, you may get into really what is a codependent pattern of trying to fix the unavailable person. And the thing is, it's like there's this little child in there that's always wanted to get dad's love, and you enter into relationships where you're not being loved the way you really want, and trying to fix them, so that in the effort, sort of unconsciously, to change dad and to correct what happened with your father. And so this explains how all those statements come into being, or a big motivation for a lot of them you keep repeating the same patterns because you're trying to do it right. But as we know, when you're trying to change someone in a relationship, it often doesn't really go too well. And the real thing is that those things become, from our point of view, they become these kind of gifts and an opportunity to learn what's actually going on and to heal the pattern inside yourself. Now, there's also an opportunity for your partner, if you're in a situation like that, to heal as well, and you can heal together. But what's really important is that you realize what you're doing, the unconscious motivations, and that's part of what our work addresses.
Yeah, great. So also, I think we attract the same pattern to feel the feelings that were repressed. So as children, we're attracting, as adults, we're attracting situations that are creating the same feelings for us to feel. And so most people in our society have learned how to repress and distract themselves from feeling, and maybe stuck in old protections to not feel how it actually feels. So that creates a situation where you're allowing yourself to be in an unhealthy situation and not really feeling how it feels. But the opportunity is to process the repressed emotions from childhood, because that person in your life is triggering the same feelings and also beliefs. So if they're unavailable, it's going to trigger those feelings of feeling not good enough or unlovable. And that's your opportunity to be with your child and to feel how that felt and to give yourself what you need.
Okay, great.
And move on from that situation. So we will repeat it to learn from it, to reclaim our power and our worth, and know that we deserve to be loved and supported the ways that we need to. So.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hi, Janet. Hi, Atria. Hi, Jocelyn.
Hi,
Gabe.
Laura.
Hi, Gabe. Hi, Laura. Glad you're all here.
All our friends. Thanks for joining.
And if we missed anyone, hi. And hi to people in the future that are watching this.
Yeah.
And if anyone in the past is what, oh, never mind. So one of the things that I want to address is we get a lot of people coming in who have done a lot of talk therapy, and they need some deeper work, or they don't feel like they're getting what they need. I mean, before we talk about that, I do want to say that talk therapy has so much to offer. And we provide talk therapy in our work as part of this process that we're going to talk about, the experiential therapy. And it's even necessary, and for some people it's really the preferred approach. So, we're going to be talking about some of the limits of talk therapy, but we also we want to be clear that we value talk therapy, and that it has a very important place in people's individual and healing, and group therapy can be talk therapy as well. But what keeps occurring, and we've heard so many times, is people often feel frustrated or stuck in their talk therapy, and they feel like they have good relationships with their therapist, but maybe they're going over the same things, that the therapist might be asking very similar questions. And this is one of the things that brought us to the experiential therapy. I've done a lot of talk therapy too, and for me, there were times when, I felt like I could bring the person deeper, but the format of talk therapy, the 50-minute hour, once a week or even twice a week, didn't allow the time frame to do the talk therapy. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Much of it, has to do with the structure and nature of talk therapy. And a lot of therapists get trained in what I've come to kind of understand is a very sort of passive approach to therapy, where they have faith that the person has an innate capacity to heal. And we rely on that too. But what can happen is the therapy can get into a series of of questions, and the therapist kind of trying to bring the client to a certain place or have them realize it. And that's called non-directive therapy, and it helps clients really realize that they can do some of this on their own. But frankly, most therapists, I feel, have so much more to offer than that. That if they could be more directive and take a little bit more of a lead and active role in pointing out things for clients, then people are going to move more quickly. And this is relevant to the discussion of talk therapy versus experiential therapy. Experiential therapy is more directive, and situations are created to help bring clients to where they need to be. Thanks for agreeing, Gabe.
And an example of what Doug was just describing in talk therapy, if the therapist is non-directive, then they're going to ask how the person feels about the situation or what they think they want to do about it. And the client, all they know is their own pattern. So their desire may not be good for them. Their desire is to stay with this unavailable partner because that's all they know. Or their desire is this obsession with someone who treats them just like their abusive father did, and so that's why non-directive doesn't always help people shift out of patterns.
And just the other day, Alicia said something very similar to, I kid you not, this woman's brilliant, to what Einstein said. And in the context of this discussion, and what she said is, it's very similar to, this is a quote by Einstein. She said, "Problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them." When you start applying that to like a passive therapy approach, if the therapist is relying on the client to discover their own solution, Einstein's quote applies, that they can't be solved from the same mindset. It's the same mind that created them. So that's why I think people start feeling frustrated with a lot of more passive talk therapy. It's very difficult to find one's own solutions when there are defenses in place that prevent that very healing. And again, what we're going to show is how experiential therapy has a way to kind of bypass that, get people out of their own kind of limited framework, and bring in a witness to their mental processes much more saliently. Hey, you try to say it. It's not easy to say.
I'm not going to attempt it.
Okay, thanks, hon.
So in talk therapy, like you were just saying, the client, they're gonna, the way that they have learned to feel loved and valued and appreciated as children shows up in dysfunctional ways. So there's an adaptation that's formed, say, to be there for others, to give up their needs and make sure that other people feel better. And so if you're in therapy and you're being, even advised, if there is more directive approach to therapy, to take care of yourself, it's going to feel really hard to do that until you go back to the emotional wound of not getting your needs met. So focusing on the behavior or the thoughts that are created from being abandoned emotionally as a child is it's almost impossible, because that's the only way at that point that the person feels loved, is to be there for their people, until they actually honor and validate their own experience and their feelings and learn how to give themselves the love that they needed. And that's a whole process. So that's why it's hard to break free from patterns just by saying, stop doing this, or why don't you do this instead, or think this way.
So you can see how the core emotional issue gets addressed in that. Not the beliefs, not the limit, not the adaptive pattern, which will change, but the thing that will really change it without ongoing continued effort and relapse is healing the core emotional issue. Yeah. So with talk therapy, the change happens much more slowly, and we often hear that maybe not at a deep enough level. relative to experiential work, which we're going to talk about now.
Yes, and I want to say Doug has had training in experiential work and a lot of experience with it. 20 years ago?
Yeah, even 25 years.
Yeah.
I led my first co-led experiential retreat 25 years ago, and had some training with Al Peso, psychomotor psychotherapy. I just realized Bessel van der Kolk is practicing Al Peso's psychomotor psychotherapy. And that's my primary, grounding kind of theoretical model that I use. But we do body therapy and Gestalt therapy. I've had a lot of training in as well, which can be very experiential.
Mm-hmm. And how I came about, my first exposure to experiential therapy was before I had really any therapy. So I recognized that I was in a pattern with men for most of my life until I was 30 years old. And the last one was the worst of them all. And that's after 3 months I left and I said, okay, why did I choose all of these men who are not good for me? And I said to myself at that moment, I need something that can access my pattern. And I know it's not going to go through traditional talk therapy. It was like I just had this insight that I needed something more than talk therapy. And I went to a workshop shortly after that was experiential therapy, and it shifted me so much that I ended up taking every course they offered for 4 years and assisted in them as well. And I just absolutely love this work. So and then I developed my own experiential process using the inner child and triggers and shadow projections and also symptoms. And so when Doug and I started working together just over a year ago, we didn't even realize this when we got married, that we had all of this similar skill set and experience and experiential therapy until it naturally came out one workshop I was doing on triggers. And Doug wasn't even going to assist in the workshop. He was just there as keeping me company. And then all of a sudden, we just naturally started doing an experiential process with someone, and then that's how it started. So I think it's so
I
cool.
love that story.
It's obvious why we were brought together in this lifetime.
Yeah. And this, having stepped into it with Alicia, I feel like I'm more in my purpose, really, fully for the first time. So that's what's coming through me with that.
So let's explain what experiential therapy is.
Yeah, and one last thing about the history. I've done lots of experiential therapy and body work as well as a client. And one thing I was thinking about earlier is in those workshops that I was in, there was a disproportionate number of mental health professionals, other psychologists, counselors, and I kind of thought maybe because they know that this work works, that it's effective. But experiential therapy was really first developed in the 1970s, and it's an accepted and valid and somewhat widely used form of therapy. It helps people get in touch with their emotions more and their unconscious patterns through role play, guided imagery, use of props. Empty chair technique is a Gestalt where you talk about two parts of yourself, between parts of yourself. So it's bringing the mind out into the kind of outside the head box into the world, and maybe role playing. Someone might enroll as your father, or you may have some objects that represent aspects of yourself, and you start having a relationship with that. And in the work we do, we get very focused on anything that comes out, and we're also gonna talk more about our work. But what happens is once the content of the mind, once the dynamics of the mind and the aspects of self, and even an aspect of a parent. So you may even start realizing like, I always thought my father was always there for me, but he was really not. And so we may bring an object in to represent like the neglectful side of your dad. Even though your dad may have been loving and present a lot of the time, there was an aspect that you realized affected you that may have not been there for you.
And what part of you adapted from that,
Excellent.
that you had to be,
Yes.
is also placed out in the field, is what we call it,
Yes.
with another object. And then your true self, your gifts, and your needs could be buried under another object of, the thing that was more important to your parents.
Right. And so we'll talk more about that. We're so excited about this
We
work.
love it so much.
Let's see, where are we? So one of the things in our process, core emotional experiential therapy is what we call our work, evolving out of Alicia's model and the integration of our experiential training and et cetera. And actually we're at the right point. So, we may set up the parents, there may be a grandparent behind a parent, or perhaps the grandparent's even closer or off to the side. Siblings are involved. We may have a person's gifts that maybe didn't get acknowledged and developed, and place those somewhere in the field. And what happens is we end up with so much, and anything goes, anything that is relevant and immediate in the person's experience as we're talking about the history. Now, regarding that, we do a real thorough review of a person's history, we do an assessment, and we integrate that all before we work with a person, as well as getting a feel for them and them getting a feel for us. So regarding talk therapy, we may engage in a session or 2 or 3 or more before doing this experiential work.
So the experiential therapy that we both had exposure to, experience in, and led or assisted in, may have addressed kind of one piece of what we're talking about, and it could have lasted maybe an hour to an hour and a half.
Right.
The process, the core emotional experiential process that we've developed, is a 4-hour process per person. So if you're working with us privately or in a workshop or retreat, it's 4 hours dedicated per person to go through their whole process. And the setup of what Doug was just describing, placing the objects and getting clear on what parts of you were ignored, the adaptations, the beliefs, the emotions, everyone in your life that played a part, maybe what you're moving towards is also there, your higher self, gifts, and maybe a pattern even that just came up. Yeah,
relationship.
Could be like a job pattern that was related to
Right
a family member. So all of that all takes an hour and a half just to set up.
Yeah.
During the process.
And what we do after that hour and a half, there's kind of like a little pause, and what happens is the field starts feeling complete for everyone, for us and for the client, even for other group members, and people sometimes go, "Oh my God, thank you so much, I didn't know," because what they start seeing is like what they're experiencing in relation to their career really came from some attitude that they got from their mother and that they internalized. And how they're not manifesting maybe their power or their greatest capacity in their career, but maybe they hold back too much and they're not using their strengths. And so when they see that, just that awareness alone heals. And Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt Therapy, said awareness heals. And Freud talked about making the unconscious conscious. That's really what a lot of this work is about. And that happens much more easily than when you're in talk therapy, just talking and relating to your therapist, and while the same patterns run in your head. Once it's out in the field, it just takes on a totally different feel and becomes more alive. And the little subtle aspects that go on in the mind that may undermine you become much more apparent and readily available. So that's the first.
Speaking of apparent,
but
the protections also become more
absolutely
obvious in the field. So oftentimes there's blind spots around one parent where they weren't that great and they didn't give you what you needed, but they were the best that you had. So there was oftentimes kind of an illusion of the love and support you got from them, but maybe they loved you in a way that wasn't good for you. And so,
or some part of you,
yeah.
just some
and so the part of that is working through that defense to see them clearly and reinforce that. So all of that becomes more apparent during that process when the person has resistance around acknowledging the truth about each parent and how that felt or what they needed to be or what was neglected as a result. Annie has a question: how is this different from family constellation therapy? Which is a great question. We get that often. And both Doug and I have had experience in doing as participants of constellation.
I had only one little session of it.
Well, and you did one
but
here.
People
with me.
With you, with who?
Indicator.
That's the one I was talking about.
In Barry in Thailand.
Oh, Barry. Yeah, that's right.
So,
but he's doing field work. So part of what just happened here, and we'll treat this like the field, is one of the things that happens when you say family constellation, different people understand different things. And in our workshop, people thought we were doing family constellation work, but I've never even had training in it.
One person did.
Yeah, one person did. And we're like, what happened here? Well, what's happened, first of all, I just want to give the history of family constellation. It started out as a very specific and can be a very specific thing where you deal transgenerationally with maybe some issue that's been passed down for you.
And they may take the issue and kind of just pass it down.
Yeah. So a grandfather, you may address a grandfather in the experiential work. Now, what has happened to a lot of family constellation practitioners, including Barry, who was my second exposure, is he actually talks about working in the quantum field. And that's more in line with the kind of work we do. So every type of therapy that I know of that's worth a lot has been taken and added to, and people bring their own things to it. And so, yes, there are aspects of our work, of core emotional experiential therapy, that is a lot like family constellation. What's different about it is the breadth and even some of the depth that we go into. And I was just about to address that, because now what you won't find, Annie, is that in straight up family constellation work, you're not going to get the emotions laid out. You're not going to get different aspects of self. So we'll go through multiple processes after the initial layout, sometimes during the layout, because the emotion or the experience is so intense, we may start to work it through. And generally, we look for 1 to 3 catharses, 1 to 3 really powerful emotional releases. The primary 2 are generally sort of anger and grief. But anything, fear and any emotion can come
shame.
in and be
We've
really,
had people puking up shame.
Yeah. And we also can put trauma out there. So unlike family constellation, which only deals with the primary caregivers, as far as I know, that when we're talking about pure family constellation, not the evolved.
They do the whole family, like the mother side and the father side. Yeah.
Right. We have maybe a sibling might be in there, or
past
or
relationships,
an aspect of a parent, and then we have the emotions, and we have the aspect of the client that was affected,
and the inner child.
So what happens is that's all laid out at one time, and people start seeing and feeling and experiencing the relationships. Now, I'm trained in much more body therapy. Alicia,
the empty chair,
that's
inner
a style
child
technique.
work.
So much more goes into our work. So what I said earlier is while we go for those emotional releases, it's the depth is very important, and this is full on. We don't do this in a typical therapy office. We do this in a private setting, sometimes in a group room on a weekend, in therapy office, or in retreat, or in workshops. But it's also the breadth of what we cover.
And the breadth of what we cover is the
wideness.
The core emotional complex is what we develop through the core emotional healing model. And so the core emotional complex is the emotional wounds, the limiting beliefs about self, the limiting beliefs about the world, the adaptations, what you had to be loved, and then the resulting patterns in your life.
And it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
It's a completely unique, individualized process. So that's the fairly long answer, but it gave us a chance to elucidate, to elaborate on the model and what we do in core emotional experiential therapy. Now, there's been some great testimonials on the core emotional.
Yeah, we had someone in our last workshop, Anna, she's on our website, and coreemotionalhealing.org is our website, and there's her testimonial is on the workshop page, also on our radio show.
And she had done no therapy
she had
at all
no
before
therapy,
the experiential work.
And she didn't have any huge or even hardly at all emotional releases, but just breaking through what we did through her process is broke through the defenses in the ways that she was operating that were unconscious. And as a result, she said to me yesterday, actually, she said that she's never felt this way in her whole entire life, this calm. It's lasted, that she just feels calm. She doesn't have stress. She doesn't have worry.
She's relating to her kids better.
She's being present with her kids.
And what I really
her
think,
husband, they have a better relationship.
If I were to summarize that
and
work.
she changed her relationship with her job, and she let go of a lot of stuff that came from the adaptation.
Absolutely. And if I were to summarize that work, she got out of adaptive, like almost full-on adaptive childhood. Her whole life, relationship with the kids, with her job, with her husband, with everyone, was in adaptive child mode, trying to fix things, being overperforming, and she got in touch and is now living out a free child. If I were to summarize that one, chunk of work, which had many phases to it, and that's over the 4 hours we do multiple things, sometimes body work, sometimes like empty chairs, sometimes reliving a childhood memory and seeing what was engendered in that and how it represented more issues. So
and I'll give it an example. I just did our experiential process on myself with Doug. So I recognized in the beginning of this year a pattern, and so going back to the beginning of this video when we were talking about how to recognize when you're in a pattern, I was catching myself in a pattern saying, why does this keep happening to me, as it related to some dynamics with my work. And I was like, why does this keep happening to me? And it got stronger and stronger and more painful. And so I finally said, okay, this must be something within me to look at. And it just so happened that my father had contacted me, and I saw the pattern more clearly. I said, oh, yes, that's where it comes from, because it just happened with him around that same time.
As it was laid out in the field.
No, when he contacted me on email. And that's what made me say, oh, I have to work. You
use that information from the email as part of the process.
And I recognized that, and I said, oh, before all of that, I didn't even know I had something unresolved with my father. We have healed our relationship so much that I thought I was done with my father. And
I'm amazed he survived it.
Of course, I always suggest never to say you're done, that you've done it, because
it's like the onion, there's layers,
so
and it comes back around and you get another piece.
There's so many layers and aspects.
But you found in that structure the piece.
So we decided to do a structure on the pattern that I had saw. So through my work that was related to my father. And the experiential work is so powerful and effective because I wasn't feeling any emotion, and I didn't have access to what was happening until I sat down and I started laying out the objects, and I knew exactly who my father was. And as soon as I put him down, all of a sudden the emotion came up, and I was like, oh my God. So we had laid out the field, and Doug was brilliant, as he always is, at setting up the field. And then there was always brilliant.
Oh, okay.
Always.
Yeah, it's not what you were saying earlier today.
He's at setting up the field.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Always brilliant at setting up the field.
I love it.
Yes, and he's so good at it. And he did some really cool.
Blush. I almost never blush, but I just am blushing.
He did some really cool things that were so powerful for my field that made sense. And as I was going through this movement of what was coming up from seeing this dynamic all laid out, I was yelling and talking and expressing myself of what needed to shift that was related to my dynamic with my father as a child. And then in that moment, I turned to Doug and I was like, that's what's been happening in our relationship. And I never saw that. Neither one of us did until that moment when I was talking to my father in the structure, in the field. Then I was like, oh, that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
and what was magical around that is there was a shift the day before in that dynamic where I got much more active in her business.
Which is now our business. Because back then it was my business.
and that work helped shift me. But not only because I witnessed it, but we've had other people do this work and see shifts in their partners. And that's amazing. Not like major core emotional shifts, but some change in their behavior that brings them into maybe greater responsibility or fulfilling the need that wasn't met in the person that did do the structure.
And if you're in a relationship, doing it together is really powerful because of what could happen with that, and then the other person.
We'll do something on the couples work.
Yeah. So and then in that same, that same process with me, we got to the adaptation part of myself of just being strong and handling it all, because that's what I had to do as a child, and it was showing up in my work. And then Doug walked me through an empty chair exercise where that strong could handle it all part of me, and then my vulnerable self that was feeling it all more than ever talked to each other. So I was going back and forth in the chair, and finally that shifted, and I was able to let go a lot of things that weren't good for me. And so much has happened as a result. The creativity has come in, and inspiration, and more opportunities, and growth has happened too. So it's been so great.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So that's what can happen in an experiential process, and the shifts and the breakthroughs are immediate. And that's what we see. It's not a when we're working online or doing sessions and things like that, it's like the slow thing that happens over time.
Talk therapy, it's because you don't have that immediacy and that intensity and the depth. And in the 4 hours with two therapists, we work together in these. Rarely one of us will do it, but we work together. And 4 hours gives you the time frame. That's what I was saying earlier, that the 50-minute hour, you dip your toe in again and again, and you dip your toe every 50 minutes, and you can't even get to the point of depth that you're in an hour and a half into our work, where then the work really begins, the emotion, the movement really begins. And that's another important difference between traditional talk therapy and experiential work, where you have 4 hours to do this, or more or less. We sometimes have gone 5 hours.
And we do not only the emotional expression, the releasing, expressing what you wanted to say, and to full-on rage or anger releasing. Sometimes, it's not all the time. We've had people who've had severe abuse that needed to express that anger, and then we do a completion. So once the emotion is expressed, then the energy is gone from that dynamic or that belief, and then it can be moved and cleared.
So the objects actually go back onto the table because the energy has been dissipated, the awareness has been brought, the healing has occurred, and we may write down some emotions that we throughout the whole process, and start. So the field starts shifting, the objects start moving. Some go back on the table. People feel what in Gestalt therapy is called closure. And with that, the objects get moved, and then maybe the gift starts coming in, and maybe even shifts, and maybe a new object can come in at that point too. And a lot of the trauma and the abuse and neglect gets shifted out of the field, while we have this kind of pile of emotions that we've been writing down as we've gone. And
then what's left is so beautiful. The completion process is that you've reclaimed your true self, or your vulnerable self. You've had access to your inner child, your true needs, and your gifts, and your clarity and power to move forward with all of that to what you really want. And sometimes someone wants a relationship or to fulfill their purpose and their dreams are also represented in the field with the higher self.
Mm-hmm. Right now in this field, Gabe's sharing love.
Thanks,
we love
Gabe.
you so
love
much,
you.
Gabe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then in the end, we take the difficult emotions and the things of the past, and we'll go out and we'll burn those sheets of paper as part of an added ritual closure around all the work.
Yeah.
And what again, the depth of the healing, and then the breadth. What I'm coming to understand is that it creates these openings, and this like happened, the freedom and some openings and things just move in people's lives.
We've had people, as soon as they were done with it, things started happening. Like an opportunity came because they cleared not being supported, and then all of a sudden their partner started to bring in more money, or they started to finish a creative project that they had a block around.
Or the next day going into their boss and saying, I'm being abused in this situation, can we do something? And it's not like this horrible thing. It's like the boss is like, oh my God, yes, we need to do something for you. Mm-hmm. Getting the support that they've always wanted.
So great. So we offer this core emotional experiential therapy in private healing immersions in Atlanta. We also travel, so if we're in your area, or if you want to fly us to you, we can do that as well. We also do 3-day workshops and 7-day retreats in Costa Rica. We also, what we love to do is work with couples as well. So if you're a couple who wants to do this work, we do private immersion. So it's a full day, pretty full day. So you each have a process and then a couple's process. So that is so powerful to witness what the other person had gone through and where their triggers are. Yeah. And it brings in so much empathy for you in the relationship and what the person truly needs from you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Annie.
What happens is you get to see, instead of just being triggered by one another, you can start seeing why you're triggering one another, and then you know where the other person's triggers are, and it stops the anger and the detachment that often is the dysfunction in couples work.
Yeah. And so you experience your own personal healing and then also healing in your relationship, and you'll walk away with awareness of how to continue healing and growing in your relationship.
But this was good.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for watching, and if you have any questions, contact us on our website, coreemotionalhealing.org.
Or on Facebook.
Yeah,
that's what
comment on this video if you have any questions. And we do offer free assessments, so if you're interested in the experiential work, there's a contact form on our website that you can fill out. All right, thank you. Wishing you lots of love and growth in your life.